So I'm watching McLaughlin Group from last week, and they are discussing Mitt Romney's religion speech. And here's some of what Lawrence O'Donnell had to say.
There's a big problem. Look, I'm not a Mormon, but I do play one on TV.
Are you a Christian?
On Big Love, the HBO series that has been a real headache for Romney. Here's the problem. He dare not discuss his religion. And he fools people like Pat Buchanan, who should know better. This was the worst speech, the worst political speech of my lifetime, because this man stood there and said to you, "This is the faith of my fathers." And you and none of these commentators who like this speech realize that the faith of his father is a racist faith. As of 1978, it was an officially racist faith, and for political convenience, in 1978, it switched. And it said, okay, black people can be in this church. He believes, if he believes the faith of his fathers, that black people are black because in heaven they turned away from God, in this demented Scientology-like notion of what was going on in heaven before the creation of the earth.
Mormonism disqualifies him from being president of the United
saying
States.
He's got to answer. When he was 30 years old and he firmly believed in the faith of his fathers that black people are inferior, when did he change his mind? Did the religion have to tell him to change his mind? And when he talks about the faith of his father, how about the faith of his great-grandfather who had 5 wives?
Well, look, my great-grandfather had slaves. And I don't believe in slavery.
And his religion is based on the work of a lying, fraudulent criminal named Joseph Smith, who was a racist, who was pro-slavery. His religion was completely pro-slavery.
My point is, this guy said his beliefs. He is living by the precepts of his faith. This is a good man. He is a courageous man in what he has said.
His religion believed in slavery. Did
I know
yours?
it. But look, listen, the Christianity condones slavery.
You don't believe
for 1,500
anything
years.
he believes, Pat. You don't believe any of it.
Now, to clarify what O'Donnell said at the beginning, the show he's on is HBO show Big Love. He's a character on that show, and it's about polygamous Mormons, I believe. I've never actually seen the show. But apparently because he's on the show, that makes him an expert. Well, to be fair, he got a lot of his facts right. Mormonism essentially had institutionalized racism in the religion up until 1978. And I actually agree with most of what O'Donnell says about the religion. I disagree with a lot of Mormonism. I'm not a Mormon. I'm an evangelical Christian, if you want to put a label on it. I believe in the divinity of Christ and the Trinity. I believe that the Bible is the Word of God and so on. And I believe that Mormonism is wrong on many counts. But I also don't want to turn this into a witch hunt. I don't care what religion someone is. But O'Donnell does make some interesting points. And it's probably a fair question to ask if Romney believed in 1978 what the church said about blacks. But he basically assumes, because of what Romney said, that he does. But listen to what O'Donnell says again. He says, the faith of his father is a racist faith. Well, who is Mitt Romney's father? Governor George Romney of Michigan, who, long before 1978, was a strong advocate for civil rights for blacks. And we're talking about the 60s here when he was governor. And he was a very strong advocate for civil rights. And George Romney actually had to come out and talk about the difference between what his church taught and what he believed. And that seemed to be good enough back then, when we were right in the thick of it. Sure, some people on both sides hated him. There were a lot of civil rights people who didn't accept it because, well, you're a Mormon, the Mormon church is racist, so that's it. But it seemed to be good enough for most people at the time, even in Michigan, which had some pretty nasty riots at the time. And it's really funny that Pat Buchanan made a great point. You know, he says, Romney's great-grandfather had 5 wives because my great-grandfather owned slaves. And then he later says, well, his religion used to condone slavery or and racism. What about your religion? Yes, Protestantism and Catholicism, Pat Buchanan's a Catholic, both of them condone slavery and racism for years and years and years. And it's funny that he O'Donnell loves to wag his finger, especially the more wrong he is, the more his finger wags, and he's wagging his finger at Pat, and Pat says, well, yeah, and yes, we did condone slavery and racism, and yes, my great-grandfather owned slaves, and these rebuttals to his points don't faze him in the slightest. He just keeps going full speed ahead. And now, it is true that Mitt says he accepts all of what his church says is doctrine, but so did his father, and yet his father was not, didn't agree with that particular part. And so I think it's safer to assume that Romney is not entirely telling the truth when he says he believes all of his church's doctrine, or that at least back in the 70s that he did. I think he just says that because he loves his church and he doesn't want to diss it, and he doesn't want to get into a big, theological discussion about Mormonism. And so he just says, I agree with all of it, and sets that to the side. And maybe he doesn't agree with every little thing. His father didn't. And he says he has the faith of his father, right? So again, if someone wants to ask him the question, fine. Before 1978, did you agree with the church's stance on racism? And find out what his answer is. But let's not get on some witch hunt and assume that he's some sort of closet racist, or that he is an ex-racist and just doesn't want to talk about it. And to me, this just seems like it's just one guy who hates Mormonism, who just is out to get anyone who's Mormon. And that's a shame. And also other places in that clip, you have Eleanor Clift and Pat Buchanan both agreeing that O'Donnell's going way over the line. And when Eleanor and Pat agree on something, it's either very right or very wrong. And I think in this case, it's very right.
I want to grow up to be a politician and take over this beautiful land. I want to grow up to be a politician and be the old US of A's #1 man. I'll always be tough, but I'll never be scary. I want to shoot guns.